We are now like to welcome Stephanie Hankey to join the screen.
Stephanie is the co-founder and executive director of the Tactical Technology Collective, or as it's known, simply Tactical Tech. Their website's an excellent resource, tacticaltech.org. Definitely check it out. And it's a highly respected consultant to NGOs and governments on the ethical design of technology and the politics of data. Stephanie Hankey has been a visiting fellow at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University and a visiting industry associate at the Oxford Internet Institute of University of Oxford.
Sorry, that's my typo. Oxford Internet Institute of the University of Oxford. In any case, Stephanie, welcome to the digital stage. It's very nice to have you here as the closing keynote of the public session or the streaming session of the DX AI EUNIC Gitte Institute Week. Welcome.
And thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I'm going to switch the topic a little bit, I guess. I'm going to talk less about sort of systems and technologies that are being used, which are based on AI and machine learning, and talk more about how we help young people understand AI and machine learning. So our work is, just maybe for those of you who don't know Tactical Tech, but thanks for the introduction. We mainly work on capacity building and training to help different kinds of people, including young people, think about how technology impacts the way they live and how it changes the society. And we do that internationally. See if I can get this working. Yeah. Great. What I want to talk about particularly today is a project that we launched earlier this year called What the Future Wants, which is looking at what young people want in the context of technology. We think about it as what do they think, what do they know, what do they want to know about the digital environment that they inhabit currently and the digital environment they will inherit. So we're thinking about both current technology that they're used to and familiar with, but they might not know how it works. And also, what is that environment they're going to inherit? So how is that going to impact them as they grow up and the kind of institutions they deal with and so on? And in this context, we're thinking about how can we engage young people, like not in neither a dystopic or a utopic way of thinking about technology. We're not trying to put them off or make them think that, this is something they need to be very concerned about in a sort of dystopic way, and we're not also really enthusiastic about technology. What we're trying to do instead is kind of complicate this middle ground. That's how we think about it, and to be playful and to engage them in that conversation. We mainly do this through critical thinking and digital literacy, and we split the two up for a specific reason that I'll show you now. But I want to talk about, I'll dip in and out the topic specifically of AI and education. Sometimes it's a bit overlapping because sometimes the content is having young people think about how AI and machine learning may change the way they learn. And sometimes it's really just about helping them understand the technologies that they're working with. And what we're interested in is how do you engage young people outside of the education space? So we do this in retail spaces, on streets, in libraries, in schools, and so on. And how do you also do it within the curricular? And so these two things are kind of interchangeable for us. A lot of the work we're doing is taking forward two main projects that we've had and that we know work really well with engaging citizens on questions around technology, specifically around questions where people may find technology either accessible, difficult, a bit boring, maybe they're not that relevant to them. So we find ways to make it interesting. So with the Glassroom, we've done things like opened up big shops on high streets that look like this. This is one at Leicester Square in London, and we do this work around the world. And they intentionally use the language of technology. So you come in, you probably think it's an Apple store, you probably think it's a tech store, but when you come in, nothing's for sale. And the objects on display are actually kind of interesting journeys and narratives and critiques through technology that you can explore. And we're using this aesthetic input purposefully to make it, I think, accessible to all kinds of people who come in to the space. And these places are really popular and usually kind of buzzing with people who want to come in, noisy spaces, interactive spaces, lots of analog things, not only digital. And people, this is a queue actually outside the shop we did in London. People hear about it, creates a buzz, and they want to come in and talk about these technologies. So this is how we approach critical thinking, very different than maybe other approaches, which we think of as an invitation to explore. I'm just going to quickly flash through a whole bunch of ideas of the kinds of things that we have in there, so you get a sense of how it is that we play with these issues with young people. So firstly, what's going on behind the screen? So what's going on? I think people think that young people are tech savvy. Well, they are in terms of their use, but they're not really in terms of understanding how it really works. So we start trying to open up these questions for young people. We do things like literally even analog. We work with artists and we curate the show. Some of the pieces are our own, and some of the pieces we curate from other artists. This is one where people can literally go through all these books and look for their password, which is super popular, but gets the concepts across for people really quickly. This is one, you can see the names of the artists on the corner if you're interested. This is one where people can actually try out facial recognition technology on themselves, super popular piece, but they also get to see like how it is that these databases are built, and that's a slightly more critical side to it. This is one where people can buy their own Instagram followers, very popular with young people, where for just $2, you can buy 200 Insta likes. And it actually works. You put the money in and you put your account in, and then it sort of tots up very quickly. But sort of breaking down the wall behind the mechanisms behind these technologies. That's the idea of this. And this is one where, and this is very poignant given what we've been talking about how do you track behavior and how do you understand how students are responding to learning. This is one by an artist called Stealing Your Feelings. And you can go through the screen, it tells you automatically while you're looking at it how it's reading your responses and what it understands about whether you do or don't like the images you're being shown, in this case, Kanye West and some dogs, I think. But the point is these kinds of artists, really playful, really people can relate to very quickly and connect with these issues, but obviously a much deeper meaning and much more complex questions going on behind these pieces. And we put them together in such a way that it creates quite a sort of complex narrative, I think. I can talk about why we do that in a second. So I'll just show you quickly run through just to give you the sense of what it's like to go to the classroom. Another section we have looks at this question. Just because we can make these technologies doesn't mean we should. So for example, we had, I'm not going to show this video because we won't have time, but you can find it on the internet, which is a project called Live Studio, which is actually behavioral scoring for kids in schools. And we're really interested in how it is that behavioral scoring could be, used, let's say, in two different ways, very positive reinforcement, but also very difficult for some children with behavioral issues. And also, like, what is the concept of scoring when we put that onto language and learning? And then we have playful things like this is called fake or real, which is like, is this technology real or is it not? Because some of the technologies are so crazy. And these are the kinds of things which get people really thinking about these questions. They're really provocations that we put in the space for people to really delve into the issues. And then looking at the question of what we call who's using who. So like, these big platforms, how do they work really? This is a piece we have looking at all the different acquisitions and mergers that Google have made over the last several years. And in the work, these are ones you see, the examples are from the sort of generic public ones we do, but with young people, we're also tailoring this. So how does this kind of thing relate to the question of, and going back to our AI and education discussion, we were of course just looking at lots of nice, small, nimble startups, but of course those very big companies like Google and Microsoft and so on are very influential in the AI and education space. And what does it mean when some of the biggest tech companies in the world are inside schools, inside learning profiles of students, inside behavioral profiles of students? So we link these big questions about platforms and so on to things that directly relate to young people. And also, how is this technology designed to begin with? So this is a poster we have called 6 Easy Steps to Get Kids Addicted to Their Phones. And we provoke this kind of discussion about, should we really be blaming kids for not being able to put their phones down when they're purposely designed to addict them? And so we break down like, what are all the different techniques used when when designers are actually designing technology to get kids into that kind of loop where they really can't put them down. So again, all these things that, you can find them online, or we're happy to share them afterwards if you want to dig through some of them later. I'm just trying to give you a sense of how we engage with young people in critical thinking and how we get them to really think about these issues for themselves. Our approach in our pedagogy is we're really interested in just throwing a lot out there. Seeing is believing is our technique. We kind of really believe that when you give young people access to these insights, that they make their own decisions about them. And we're also very keen on not doing it technology by technology, because the technologies change. But we look at big themes like profiling, like scoring, like design techniques to nudge them, how data does that, and so on, so that they can then carry those ideas forward into other technologies. It's not a one-time learning experience. It should be like a fundamental framework for how they understand the technology going forward. And then we do a lot of debate and discussion. We have these the data detox bar, we call it. We train young people. These are our ingeniuses, so-called, who talk to people when they come in those spaces, but also do peer learning. and engage them in complex topics as well in workshops. I've got this slide up here because this is actually the protest that happened in the UK this year when algorithms were involved in scoring people's A-levels. And this is kind of a very controversial issue, but to show that young people actually can engage with these topics, want to engage with these topics. We're not going to be able to roll out these technologies without having them engaged in this discussion. They are going to want to not only assert their agency in decision making, but also they will speak out when technologies don't work, or what I like to think of as when algorithms are kind of tested in the wild. And here's another example some of you may see in the media recently, which is now causing a problem mostly in the US, but this is about online exam taking. And these are super invasive technologies that use gaze and facial recognition and computer monitoring to actually see if kids are cheating in tests or not. And that has also caused a huge uproar from young people. And so we can maybe delve into it in the question time, but these are the kinds of technologies that are relevant to young people, and they need to understand how they work, and they need to be able to respond to those questions. And so we're really interested in giving them those insights about, how they can interact in these questions that really impact them directly. And thinking about other ways of helping them think about other ways that technology can be designed. Maybe, for example, they are going to be the generation designing the next technologies. So maybe not just individual users, but also thinking about how do we design for society in the future. So like two last things maybe, and then I'll wrap up. One thing is getting them to actually make their own decisions as well. So that was all the critical thinking work. And then we do work on digital literacy, which we think of as, this is our data detox kit. How can they make their own choices? How can they navigate the sort of nitty gritty of their daily lives? In this case, this is the youth data detox we do, which helps them. These are worksheets they can do. We're really interested in using analog a lot for this. We use a lot of traditional techniques of engaging, actually. We think that not using technology to talk about technology is really powerful, actually, and we think that's really necessary. I'm just including this because this is our approach. This Your Tech, Your Way is the way that we approach this issue. It's about helping them find their way. We don't tell them what's right and wrong. We don't tell them what they should and shouldn't install or do, but rather like how can they navigate these questions. And then lastly, just to say that what I looked at when just showed you was very kind of these very large events we do, which are really high turnover, really popular and so on, but they're really difficult and expensive to roll out. So we've also developed a kind of pop-up version of this, which you can do yourselves in a library, in a school, in a conference center, in an art space, which is what's happening right now. This is a schematic of how it kind of works. And we already had hundreds of these events all over the world. Unfortunately, with COVID, it's a little bit slowed down. A lot of our exhibitions we planned this year have had to be postponed. But we're also looking at street-based versions of these exhibitions as well. Hopefully we can carry on with that. And this is how it looks when people do their own version. So anyway, I just want to show you this last picture, which is, if you remember that big graphic we looked at for Google Empire, where it was quite a complex piece, this is how we translate that into something that people can do themselves. So it just literally goes as a kind of dot to dot, and people recreate that space. So we're really interested from the very beginning of how do we get people to think about technology in a provocative, critical, sometimes funny, sometimes shocking way, and then how do we put them on this journey where they have their own experience of it and they navigate the issues for themselves, right the way from big questions about, how does this affect me and people around me and my society, right the way through to, what do I do and how can I change that, like the data detox kit. I can talk plenty more about like the reasons we do this and what we found and so on, but I'm going to leave it there because I'm sure Julian or Caroline might have some questions.
Stephanie, thank you. I mean, coming from New Models, we are like, this framework is so important to us. And I'm so glad that you guys are doing this work. I know you also have done quite a bit of work with the Gitte Institute, and you do partner with cultural organizations, and that gives me hope for the future. I think it's interesting because in the panel just before, we were talking about technology that teaches learners how they learn, right? Mm-hmm. And what I feel you've just laid out is, okay, and now let's learn how machines teach us how we learn. So it's even like one more layer, and it's very important. As kind of an opening gambit of a question, I wondered, in your position with this, like you're not tethered to any kind of corporation, you're not tethered to the state. How would you imagine cultural organizations ideally using their resources in order to better educate people about how tech is shaping cultural relations? Are there some concrete things?
Well, obviously I'm a bit biased, so I would of course say that cultural institutions should take, for example, the glass room or the detox kit and kind of, I mean, just to be clear, we produce all that Creative Commons. The whole point of the way we do it is that it can be adapted locally.
Oh, one second. I'm sorry. Actually, if you would stop sharing the screen right now, then we can both be on screen and we can also bring in others if that's okay. Thank you. Sorry, just getting a note here on the back room. Great.
I think it stopped sharing.
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay, now I can't see anyone. Hold on. Okay, good. Thanks. Yeah. So sorry, I was just saying that we use Creative Commons licensing, and the point is that we really want local institutions to take it and translate it literally language-wise, but also translate it to the context and then add their own program or their own additional things. And we've intentionally designed it so that it can be you've got this core content which hopefully is really useful, but then it can be adapted to different contexts. So that's my personal opinion about what is a great thing to do, of course, and that's why we've done it that way. But there's also more I think that people can do. I think one of the things I've seen to be, I guess there are 2 or 3 things I can see that work better than others. One is, I think, trying to teach something about the very technology people are using at this moment is always a bit fraught with problems. The technology changes all the time. You're never going to reach enough people on an ongoing basis to really make any difference. So I think we're really focused on the idea of shifting fundamental frameworks of thinking about technology, rather than like, okay, now we're going to teach you how to do this with TikTok or something, right? I mean, obviously you have to make it relevant. You have to kind of connect it to what people are interested in. But I feel like one of the things we've sort of, one of our theses and one of the things we've seen very clearly is that rather teaching people to think about the bigger questions and connecting them to the things they care about is much more relevant. So even in the context of working with young people, we're really, for example, the next generation really cares about climate change. There are many, many things to talk about when it comes to AI and climate change. So attaching it to an issue that they care about is going to be something that they're much more engaged with. And you could say the same for other generations, like older people and so on. But when we're talking about young people, finding ways to connect to the things they really care about, sometimes that's their friends, sometimes that's their, I don't know what music they listen to and so on, but sometimes it's bigger issues. And I think the idea, politicizing these topics as well, showing that they're not, I know you were saying earlier about technology being neutral or not, but I'm going a bit beyond that. I'm saying if we see technology as a mirror of society, it makes it much easier to understand what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So whatever political thinking, whatever political moment, whatever trends you see in society, they're probably going to be reflected in the online space. And this is already going to help people a lot in understanding the technology.
What about building a geopolitical bridge? We know that the framework that China sets out, the framework that America sets out, some of the ideals that we've heard voiced by Europe. Do you see that as, obviously it's a critical issue going forward. How do you see us speaking on this meta level across global stacks when it comes to these frameworks? How can cultural institutions play a role in building understanding in digital protocols or the structures that, we think about language ordering the way we think, but these digital protocols, of course, also organize the way we think, and they seem to be ever more geographically bound. How do you see cultural institutions playing a role in bridging some of those borders or protecting some of those borders?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. It comes to mind, there's this book title, which I really like, which is, it's talking about technology, obviously, and it says, designed in San Francisco, made in China, critiqued in Europe.
That's perfect.
Interesting way of thinking about these kind of, slightly different from what you were saying, but, these regional kind of interplays, right? And actually, it's interesting watching what's happened with COVID and the pandemic and technology. I think that we really see that. So I've been involved in a lot of critical discussions about the rollout of technology in that context. And for example, the way that that's seen in Asia, in places like Singapore and Korea and so on, not only because the way they see privacy, the way they see community, the way they see public service, let's say, is quite different than Europe or the US, but also they've had different experiences. They've had, for example, in this case, a SARS pandemic before. So they have already these systems in place. So even when you look at one technology like that, the value systems and the discussions we can have about how that impacts our societies are totally different than the one we might have in Germany, for example, where there are other histories at play or other kind of social concerns and political concerns at play. So I do think that this is why I'm talking about the adaptation piece. Like, I don't think that, although we do a global reach and we're really interested in scaling our work, we're always interested in the adaptations. So, for example, we just did a version of the Glassroom in Hong Kong, we did one in Ukraine, and each time it's quite different. And I think that's super important. And cultural institutions need to play that role, I think, of not just taking something kind of off the shelf, whatever it is, even something online, and they need to kind of embed it within the local, not only discussions and debates and trends, but also ways of seeing things. The different, completely legitimate, completely different reasons for seeing one thing, slightly differently. So I would just say there's a base bit of information that's the same, but the discussion that needs to happen is different. It needs contextualizing.
I have one follow-up question to that, but then do you have a question?
Go ahead.
Okay, so just a speed round question. I mean, of course, that book title is perfect. Designed in San Francisco, made in China, critiqued in Europe. Is there, we throughout this week, we have, and I know we're a bit guilty of this coming from America, where things went from utopia to like really hell that, in 20 years, we tend to idealize Europe as like a just critic and as like the high standard for like online protocol or digital protocols. Is there something that Europe should maybe take from San Francisco and should maybe take from China? Are there, if you were to just free associate off the top of your head, is there some quality or value or habit that is particularly Californian or particularly Chinese that you think actually is a benefit to the European discussion?
I like that question. It's really difficult. You said it was a speed round question. That's not a speed round question. It's really complicated. And also I have to be careful what I say. No, if I have to be put that way, and pushed a little bit because I find it a little bit tricky. I would say from China production, like I think that's what they're amazing at, aside from many other things. I think that we don't have that kind of production capacity in Europe. And so I think that, and I mean like engineering and hardware and so on. And I think in the case of San Francisco, I mean, I'm calling it San Francisco, of course it's like much more complex than that, but what's been idolized as San Francisco or Silicon Valley, I think it's that kind of total risk-taking, can-do attitude, kind of, just going in there and doing it. I think there's a part of that's really positive and necessary. If you don't take those kinds of risks, you're never going to do that. And you heard that from some of the entrepreneurs earlier who definitely have that view. However, that attitude also brings this kind of testing in the wild thing. And that's really a problem with young people. If we're just going back to this AI education thing, it's okay to test in the wild. I don't know how you get a book to someone. It's not okay to test in the wild how you remotely manage an exam at their home, right? Which makes students stressed. And there's been all kinds of huge problems with that. Or to test out in the wild an algorithm that makes people fail their A-levels and not be able to go to university, right? So I think these are technology spaces where, yes, we should learn things from America and China, but actually the European level-headedness maybe about what that can mean is really essential.
Yeah.
And I just, because we're talking about, I just want to loop back what we've been talking about, if that's okay with the previous speakers, which is, I really like the enthusiasm for, because of COVID, we have to do this online, we have to, and I agree with that. But the problem is these things are designed for the ideal world, not the real world, in my view. And that's this kind of Silicon Valley mindset, right? If kids were amazingly perfect and were all machines, then our machine would work amazingly well, but that's not the way it works. And I think when you introduce these technology, you solve problems, but you create problems at the same time. Like looking at things like emotion, empathy, like sounds great, but actually, what are you actually doing when you do that? You're collecting information on people's feelings. That's
right.
Really,
when you think of home devices or something, home surveillance devices, you think, oh, well, it's to keep out like robbers, but really it's like for parents to surveil their children or vice versa. And it creates lots of unintended dynamics.
But I can think of, 10 reasons why as a teacher, I'd want to know about my pupils' emotions, assuming I'm a good teacher and assuming I'm not biased and assuming I'm not going to use that, and assuming it doesn't stay on record and assuming, this kid isn't a problem kid because actually they have problems at home or, I think this is just so complicated, right? And so we introduce these complexities, which I think create much bigger complexities that we're not really taking into mind. And then the last thing I'd say on that is, in our view, this is the whole question here, you definitely see with the pandemic and education right now, is, I think of this phrase, entrances are wide and exits are narrow. So it's super fast to bring in all these technologies. Everybody loves it. Everybody wants to invest in it. You know, governments, you know, ministries, schools, they're all like, of course, why wouldn't you want that right now? But as we start to see the problems, closing those things down and moving them into sensible spaces is going to be super hard. So I think
of emotion, there's actually a question in the chat that I think was for the previous panel,
a bit more broadly applies to the world of AI, I guess, and what's developing there. Yes, but perhaps you could answer.
You're certainly equipped to answer it, so maybe you could give a crack. Maybe you can see it, but it says, or do you want to read it?
Sure. In the last years, we've seen EQ, which is like, I guess, emotional quotient, the emotional version of the IQ. Having been increased in fields of research, but also used as a practical tool to understand performance in the business field. Do you believe that EQ will, emotion, I guess, what do you see the role of emotion AI being in the future? And they go on to, I guess, philosophically ask what would differentiate humans from machines if emotion is somehow codified, formalized algorithmically, or recognized impeccably?
Well, I think, so in my experience, there's a lot of drive for this development. Let's just call it, for the sake of, you know, different terminologies, let's just say emotional recognition. Let's call that for a second. Then it's in all kinds of formats. And I would say that there's a lot of drive for it for a lot of different reasons. And you just heard about it in the case of education, that it could be important. Again, usually from a protectionist and well-meaning place, but actually without looking at the full remit of what that implies. But you also see a lot of businesses pushing for it. For example, in the way we all now work online, there's a lot of startups and research institutes who really want to know how people could collaborate better online, you know, like how teams work and how, you know, how people can be creative together. So usually from a well-meaning place, but super complex in terms of what that dips into, in terms of how real human response is. So I do think there's a lot of business incentive and investment in that area. And I think it's naive to think it's not directly connected to advertising. If you think back to the sorts of scandals we've seen around Cambridge Analytica and these kind of political issues the last few years, a lot of that is about what they call psychometric profiling. So how you respond and feel and react to things like political advertising. You know, so we think of these things in isolated boxes, like, oh, technology for behavior and emotion in education, we need to understand our pupils and how they're doing, or separately for working in teams, or separately for whatever. But the truth is, a lot of it's based on advertising. If I know how you react to, I don't know, an advert, well, like those examples we gave earlier with the dog, you know, then, and I can see how you emotionally respond, I can sell more stuff to you. So I think we on the receiving end tend to think of these technologies as all kind of isolated, but I don't think that we really look at mechanisms underlying them that actually drives a development. And regardless of the end use, the core development is the same. And when you look at the technology companies developing them, and sorry, now this opened up a whole complex question, I realized, but I was asked.
Super interesting, right?
Just to say, you know, at the end of the day, Google and Facebook are advertising companies, right? And they have the biggest resources in the world. They have the best engineers, the most people with PhDs, and they're solving those problems. Whether they're the problems we should solve or not, that's a whole other kind of challenge. And then the last part of the question, which was about the future, I would say that entirely depends who you talk to. Because if you talk to AI specialists and machine learning people who actually work on it, they're like, no, that's not, like, that's ridiculous. That's never going to happen. But if you talk to people who write narratives and science fiction, they're like, yes. So I think I think it's kind of, at the moment, you get all responses. Nobody knows.
I think it's important, the point you made about the origins of a lot of this in advertising. Of course, the biggest challenge to democracy in the past few decades is applying knowledge gleaned from advertising to the political arena.
I mean, but since Saatchi and Saatchi, I mean, since Thatcherism, since, you know, since always appealing to the emotional, it has massive political implications when you're shifting the demos's idea of what a just government is through manipulating their emotions. Super interesting territory. I think we have to wrap up now. It would be nice to also bring Gitte back on, Gitte Zschoch, who is the EUNIC who came up with the concept for this week. Stephanie, maybe stay on for a moment. And maybe we could ask one transition question about
ultimately about I guess we know artists play a really important role right now in sort of communicating these rapidly emerging complex problems in an interesting and dynamic way that the public can understand. I wonder how you sort of nurture the collaboration between artists and your organization, and then Gitte as well, the role of nurturing or generating new forms of cooperation with artists in order to help.
For context, we were talking in the previous days about how often artists get co-opted as a kind of R&D for tech corporations. And then they say, yes, we have an artist on board. And oh, yes, isn't that good to think about that? And then they use it as a way of like validating whatever their decisions are. Or they take the convenient parts and kind of leave out the inconvenient parts. And so maybe if you had some thoughts, maybe Gitte also, if you wanted to join in the stream now of this conversation as we segue to a wrap up of this week, what role do you see artists playing in even the coming months for keeping us sharp about how the systems that teach us how to learn, how we learn about learning about the systems that teach us how to learn?
I think, well, so for us, working with artists who are not, I would call them not the usual suspects. So, and they're not, art's a really complex term. These are not gallery artists that we work
Absolutely.
with. Right. So they're not the kind of people that you'd see if you go to the Tate or the Museum of Modern Art and so on. And we think that's important. And they're artists who really, they do work with artistic concepts. I'm not going to say that they're not, but they're also comfortable with an educational context. They don't mind if we use it in that context, let's say. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is we try to work with, we haven't had the kind of resources that we would need to commission people, which would be amazing. So we've tried to work with the resources that we have in terms of bringing different artists in and then promoting them and their work, but also making sure that they come in and do talks and workshops and that they're present in the space and so on. Obviously, that's not possible with the smaller events. I have to say it's really tricky because the way we do, for example, the community edition, this pop-up version, is not really possible for us to work with artists in that context. But I would say there's so much to be done. Like, it's such an effective technique. And you're right that artists are bringing some of the most interesting and important critique to these spaces in a way that people can relate to, right? I think there are lots of other people doing critique, journalists, academics, and so on, but this is a completely different format. And I think that what needs to happen next, this is my pitch, I guess, in other ways as well, is that there needs to be investment in that process. And, you know, for organizations like ours to be able to commission artists, to be able to work with them on things like how we get this to the public would be amazing. But I think that that's just next stage. Hopefully that will come in the future.
We love this expanded idea of artists. We think it's an incredibly important one, and are so glad that you're using it here. I wonder now, I want to say thank you, Stephanie, for these incredibly interesting remarks and giving us an excellent frame to go forward this year. Maybe, Gitte, we could also ask you if reflecting on this week, it's Gitte Zschoch from EUNIC is the person who came up with the concept for this conference, along with Jeanette Neustadt, who helped us commission everybody to come and speak. Maybe you can say, like, reflecting on the past 4 days, what sort of actionable things do you imagine cultural institutions taking forward into the year ahead? What are some of the banner reflections from these past 4 days that you think are particularly useful for us to highlight?
Thanks, Caroline, and thank you, Stephanie. Also, I think that was a really great last presentation that we heard from you, and your work on sort of inserting critical thinking into this whole idea of tech, digital shift, AI, all of these issues that we explored in this past week, 4 days actually. Yeah, I think for us as the network of the EU National Institutes for Culture, so those organizations that deal with cultural cooperation across borders, bringing people together. Our motto is to create trust and understanding between the peoples of Europe and the wider world through culture. It was a moment to look at one specific topic, that of how the digital shift has affected our work and how specifically also AI plays a role, mostly in what we do in terms of culture and education. And I think the idea was to learn, you know, and also get motivated and encouraged to deal with these topics that might sometimes seem very large. A lot of our members are quite, I mean, they're not necessarily governmental institutes, but some are a bit more detached and more independent, but it's a big topic. And we heard also today how difficult it is to to instill that shift, inside of these institutions with sometimes 160 or even 800 branches worldwide. So what do I take from here? I was reflecting, on how we started this week with Elisa Lindinger and her call for civic space. And to say that, this digital space is it's inhabited by private companies, and how can we create digital rights and a public sphere in this area. And I think that's something where she saw the role of cultural institutes like our members. And I think that's something that we need to consider and discuss more. And I also think this ties back nicely into what Sabine Verheyen said, of the European Parliament, who looked at the role of the EU. And this also came back nicely now with Stephanie, to have the EU as or all the organizations and people, who make up the EU, artists, thinkers, and people who create also platforms, like learning platforms. What's the role of those? And I like this idea of having this sort of, I think Sabine called it trustworthy AI, or these moral reflections, or the critical distance that is brought in, and something that is an approach that's human-centered to this all. And yeah, so lots of food for thought. I think we learned nicely also about what can artists bring to the discussion, but what it also means for language education. So these two big themes that we're dealing with. And yeah, there's still open questions, I think, a lot of open questions. And one of those would be, how will creativity really be changed through this? I think this came up yesterday with Octavio Cule's presentation on what this all means for creativity, also in the global sphere. I think that's also something, when we say we create trust and understanding, how can we make sure that this divide in the world, geopolitical divide, doesn't deepen, but rather that we find points of connections. So these are some of the ideas and reflections that go around in my head at this point.
Well, super. I mean, again, I can't say it enough. As Americans, it's really encouraging to see the consortium of European cultural organizations focusing on these questions. They are big questions. You're not going to solve them in 4 days. We're not going to solve them in 4 years, but we need to continuously work with them. And it's great to know that there are minds like Stephanie's that are working on this, and all the speakers that we've heard from today. Maybe we should have a few closing remarks, and then I think there's a final session of this conference, which will happen not live streamed, although it is open to the public. Unless, Gitte, there's something else that you think we should address between all of us first, or is it all good?
I'll let you do the credits, but I would like to thank you, Julian and Caroline, for having carried us through these 4 days, and for your moderation. It was excellent to have you along. Thanks for asking pointed questions, and it was really good to have moderators who really know the topics as well as you do. So thanks from us as the team behind this to you guys.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
And thank you to all the listeners for putting up with our Americanness and our obsequious relationship towards all things European. But no, we are really encouraged by the kind of conversation that is happening in these spaces. We want to let you know that we mentioned it earlier, but that Gitte has something called Couch Lessons, where they do this every Wednesday. You can find the link online, and I think the link can also be found in the chat. It's a series where the Gitte hosts experts from across Europe and elsewhere on the globe to discuss the opportunities, challenges, and risks associated with algorithmic decision-making systems. The sessions are in English, they are free, they're open to the public. This is an excellent example of a cultural institution using its space and its resources to address these incredibly urgent questions. It is a kind of AI literacy. So also, I think the themes of education that were addressed this week are directly being addressed by this series. The next session will be held this coming Wednesday, which is November 25th. Again, free, open to the public in this lingua franca of English. You can find out more at www.goethe.de. And yes, perhaps the link is in the chat.
I believe it is.
There's also another thing I want to point your attention to is something called the 1-0 Society. Again, you can find that link easily on the Goethe's homepage. It's a blog that's all original content that's focused on post-digital culture. It's a great nexus, along with tactical tech and some of the other links that we provided this week for finding out more, continuing the conversation. This obviously does not end today. This conversation will only intensify, I'm sure. One more time, I want to thank everybody who's involved with this and for having us as your host. Again, the concept was by Gitte Zschoch of EUNIC, who you just saw.
Curation and production by Jeanette Neustadt from the Goethe Institute.
The technical production is by Pedro Yardim of New Kin Co. And they produce a lot of events like that. So go check out their website too if you are interested in putting together a digital conference like that. There are a lot of moving parts.
Animations and technical support from Tim Novikov.
The graphic design is by Amelie Bacher and Atelier Brenda.
I'll let you continue this one since you practiced it so much.
The coordination is by Lina Kyriazzo-Viate, I hope I said that right, and Giacomo Corongio and Robert Kieft. The moderation is by myself, Caroline Busta.
And Julian Wadsworth from New Models Berlin.
And we hope to see you on the internet. Please go to the link that was put in your email. Maybe it's even also in the chat, I'm not sure. Yes, it is the Zoom for the last session, which is open to the public, but will not be privately streamed. Therefore, you will need to close out of this Zoom stream and you will need to join the new one where there'll be a lot more individual processing of some of these themes and ideas. If you are from a cultural organization, or if you are an artist, or if you are a scholar, or if you're just interested in the subject matter, please feel very welcome to participate in these conversations. It's so urgent that we have them. Yes, all of these sessions will be archived on EUNIC Global's YouTube. You can see them. They're broken up into segments, so you don't have to sift through like 2 hours worth of content to find your favorite speaker. Yeah, we're New Models, newmodels.io. We're much less formal, but we also very much welcome your feedback. So please seek us out there.
Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the last session, and there's certainly a lot to think about.
Yep.
Moving forward.
All right, so signing off from here, and we wish you a good rest of your day and a close of the session. Bye.
Thank you.